Hey guys, it's Lindsay from Follow the Rules, and I am so excited to finally be sharing my royal icing recipe with you in video form. It's one of my most popular recipes on my blog. I make it all the time, so I'm very excited to finally be showing it to you. To start, you'll need 1 pound of powdered sugar. You can buy powdered sugar in 1 pound bags at the grocery store, which makes it really easy. You'll also need 3 tablespoons of meringue powder. Meringue powder comes in a canister like this. You can buy it at any craft store or online. You'll also need some water and your extract of choice. Today I am using vanilla extract. I like to make my royal icing in a nice big clean bowl. I like to stabilize it on top of a towel so the bowl doesn't move around on me. For small batches, I like using a hand mixer because it works perfectly fine, but you can also use a stand mixer. So first I'm going to add my meringue powder and my water, and I'm going to whip this up until it's nice and frothy. Not quite like a meringue where it's very thick and glossy. You just want it to be a little bit frothy with some air bubbles in it. I like to start my mixer on low speed, and then once all the meringue powder is incorporated, I kick the speed up and just let the mixer go to town. It just takes a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds, to get it to that frothiness that I'm looking for. So it's hard to see from all the way up here, so I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see all of the air bubbles and just how kind of fluffy the meringue powder became. Now to my whipped up meringue powder, I'm going to add the entire pound of powdered sugar. I'm also going to pour in my vanilla extract, and then I'm going to start mixing. Again, I like to start on slow speed because if you start on high, that powdered sugar is just going to end up everywhere and it'll be a hassle to clean. So you'll see as I start to mix this up that it becomes very thick and crumbly. This means I need to add a little bit more water. So I'll add a little bit more water, but just a touch, because a little bit goes a long way when it comes to royal icing and powdered sugar. You really don't have to add a lot of water to make a big difference. So as you can see, I'm only adding maybe a tablespoon of water, and the consistency of the royal icing will change dramatically. So it'll go from this crumbly, kind of ivory, opaque consistency, and then as I start mixing more and turn this speed up, it'll become very glossy and a very bright white. It'll also increase in size as I whip in more air, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that bright white, glossy, thick, but fluffy consistency, if that makes any sense. I actually like to whip up my royal icing for several minutes, and this is where a stand mixer really comes in handy because you can just set it and forget it and let it do all the work. With a hand mixer, it's a little bit more work, but it's fine. So I really mix it for about maybe 1 to 2 minutes. If I have a really big batch, I'll whip it for even more. So from here on out, I'm actually going to do the rest of the mixing with a spatula. I like using a spatula because not only is it a great arm workout, but it also ensures that all that icing down at the bottom is getting evenly mixed into the rest of the icing. It's really important when you're going for a very specific consistency of icing that all the icing is being mixed in and it's all the same consistency. So right now it's pretty thick, so I'm going to start adding a little bit of water at a time. I like using this eyedropper tool. You could also use a little spray bottle. I have friends with kids that say a little sippy cup works well too, but you really want to add water just a little bit at a time. There are 3 main consistencies of icing that I work with most often, and that's stiff consistency icing, piping consistency, and flood consistency icing. Stiff consistency icing is basically what we started with. It had formed really stiff peaks and it really had no movement, and that's really great for piping anything out of a piping tip. So a lot of times you'll see me use piping tips to create flowers or leaves, and when I do that I use stiff consistency icing. The next icing that I use most often is piping consistency icing, and that's a little bit thinner than the stiff consistency. I've added more water to it. It has a little bit more movement and give, and that's great for doing borders or lettering or handwriting. So at this point I'm mixing in just enough water to get it to that piping consistency stage. So you'll see that there's a little bit more fluidity to the icing. As I drip the icing back in, it kind of goes back into itself. So that's really the perfect piping consistency icing. But the consistency that I use most often is flood consistency icing, and that's very thin icing, and it's perfect for flooding and filling large areas of a cookie. So when I just do one flat layer of icing, I use flood consistency. Even when I'm doing some small details or creating some shapes or patterns or anything on the cookie, I will use flood consistency. So a trick for making the right flood consistency is actually counting to 10 or 15 seconds. So you'll see as I mix this up, I'm actually dragging the spatula across the surface, because what I'm doing is counting to 10 to see, does the icing come back and form a flat surface. So at this point, I think I have the perfect flood consistency icing. I'm counting to 10 to make sure that it comes back to a flat surface in the right amount of time, and you can see that it does, that all those little drips and lines, they just disappear as that icing comes back into one flat surface. From here, there are a couple different things you can do with your icing. You can, of course, put it into piping bags and pipe right away, but if you are not piping anything right away, you can save it and refrigerate it, or just put it aside for when you are ready to use it. So I'll show you the best way to do that. I like using these plastic takeout containers. You can get them in large quantities on Amazon, or of course you can use any extras you have left over. Just make sure they are nice and clean and don't have any leftover scent from the food you put in them before. And just spoon your royal icing right in. It may not be a very clean affair, but it'll get the job done, I promise. So I like to give it a good tap just to make sure it's all level, and then I always put a piece of plastic wrap right on top, because as the royal icing is exposed to air, it will start to crust over. So always make sure you put a piece of plastic wrap right on top of that icing so it doesn't harden. And then just put a lid on it, and you can save that for later. Now for the icing that you're going to decorate with, you probably want to color it many different colors. I'm going to color mine peach using this AmeriColor food coloring gel, and this is my preferred brand. I prefer gel food coloring over liquid food coloring any day of the week. It is much better, and it doesn't ruin the consistency of the icing that I've worked so hard for. So I'm going to make it this really pretty peach color, and just mix in the icing or mix in the food coloring until I just get one even color. Now the icing is ready to be put into piping bags. If you've watched any of my cookie decorating videos, you may have seen me use a couple different types of piping bags. One is not a piping bag at all, it's actually a sandwich bag. This is one of my favorite tools to use because they're cheap, they're easy. I have a bunch of them in my pantry, and I can just throw them away when I'm done with them. So when I fill a sandwich bag to use as a piping bag, I put one corner down in the bottom of a cup, and then I flip the zip top portion around the edge of the cup so that I don't get any all over the top of the bag. Then I just spoon my icing in and zip up the top of the bag, making sure to get out all that air and pushing the icing down into the corner. So this is great when you don't need a lot of detail and you are just covering large portions of a cookie. This is one of my preferred methods, but of course you can always use a piping tip. So you can use any piping bag you like. I like these very inexpensive and thin piping bags that I get on Amazon. You could just put your piping tip down in the bottom of the bag and then snip the tip and push the piping tip through. And that is a great way to do it if you're only using one piping tip per color. However, if you want the flexibility to change out your piping tips, what I use a lot is this coupler, which is this 2-piece plastic set that just screws right on to one another. So I put the larger portion down inside the piping bag, and then I cut the tip so that that white portion can kind of just stick through just a bit. And then I'll put the actual piping tip right on top of that. And then with the other smaller piece, I'll screw the piping tip onto the inner larger piece. And now I have the ability to change out that piping tip if I want to. So again, I just stick the corner down into a cup, which will make it really easy for me to fill. And then I just spoon the icing right in. One downside of a piping bag is that it does not have that handy dandy zip top, and so I always recommend that you twist the top of your bag so the icing does not spill out all over the place. You could always buy these piping bag bands or clips at the craft store or online. They just ensure that your bag stays closed, so they are pretty awesome. And there you go, guys, that's how you make royal icing. I hope this video has helped make the whole process a little less intimidating, and you now know everything you need to know to make the perfect consistency of icing. Of course, if you would like to make this at home, you can find the recipe on my blog, which I will link down in the description bar. Now go forth and make some truly awesome cookies.